Hannah Wright, we are recording.
Cool.
Thank you for making the
Very
time to.
excited to do this.
Thank you, thank you. I really appreciate you making the time to sit with me a little bit. So I know you because I've known your mom
Yeah,
and
of
dad
course.
since
I'm
like
doing
the
very
early
little else.
90s. Yeah, I've known your mom and dad since like the 90s, and I've been really kind of anxious to talk to you because I kind of watched your career path since college and things like that. And you know, uh, I know it's been really boring and, status quo politically. And I know that your interests lie in the political environment. So I just wanted to talk to you and get your kind of uh, your feedback on the experiences that you've had. So you graduated George Washington University in 20. You went to DC, Elliott School of International Relations in 16.
Hmm.
Kind of about health and policy and campaign organization, political science, and was even working in Senator Warren's office.
Yes.
Uh,
That was like I have my dream internship, and then it got abruptly ended
yeah,
by, it was wild. Um, it was like impeachment. Warren drops out. Also, you're never going back to school again, sort of in like a matter of a week. It was crazy.
if I during that time, if I saw breaking news or unprecedented flash across the screen one more time, I think I was just going to go postal. It was like really just kind of nuts how everything was not just news of the day, but like everything was just so incredibly drastically big.
Yeah, and I
What
think
and
the cascading, like, it just moved so quickly. Like, I was literally living, in DC in my like college apartment one week, and the next week I was like in I just like was shuttled from my all of my family that was like taking care of me as we like figured out what the heck was going on.
Yeah, I know. And then later we're going to talk about I'm not sure what a Fillmore girl is or how many there are, but I guess we're going to talk about that maybe later in the show.
Gilmore Girls, the show of the early 2000s. Vince, you should know
Cool,
this.
cool. All right. We'll settle all that, I'm sure. But I just wanted to kind of go back because it's interesting. It's really fun to talk to you, especially your age group, because sadly, I've said this over the last 5 years, is that 10 years ago, I used to disagree with my friends politically about policy. Like I would like, oh, you like George Bush or you don't like George Bush or whatever you were on that. That conversations was about, political cultural decisions that they were making. And it was like, I agree or disagree. I don't feel like I'm having that conversation anymore. I feel like I'm having conversations about character and about, people's uh, ability to sort of accept sort of really ugly things. And it it breaks my heart a little bit because I can't talk politics because it's not politics anymore. It's something completely different. And I'd really love to see from like your age group and your peers, like when you were in DC, like really what were those conversations like?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think first off, I think it would be like I would be remiss not to say like I grew up in Los Angeles, and I was very lucky to grow up with a lot of people that, thought about not even politics, but just like the way government works or how it's involved in your lives. Like that's something that I think I not even took for granted, but like there were undocumented people that I grew up around. And so it's not that like, oh, I have a political position about this. It's like, no, I really care about these
Yeah.
people, and there's no system that exists to support them.
Word.
And then I think beyond that, going to college in DC, there were a lot of people that I met that, oh, like I want to study politics because, for a whole myriad of reasons. But I think a lot of people are very driven by, whatever like retail form of politics that you think exists.
That's a
And I
great
think
term.
especially going to DC, I think especially going to DC, like I was like, especially my first semester, fall all of my freshman year, I was in the United States, right? Like that's what I was going to DC for.
Yeah.
And like I think like there was so much hope in that. And at the same time, I think exactly what you said. There are a lot of people that I knew that wanted to quote unquote do politics. Um, and th I think especially after the 2016 election, I had a lot of thoughts about, "Oh, in DC, this is what it means to do politics or be political," right? It's like these people that care about you know, wanting to I mean, take a extreme case, but like want to make a bunch of money or want to make sure that the government doesn't regulate this industry or whatever. And I think, especially in the wake of 2016, what me and a lot of people like my age feel like, it's like, oh, it's not that like I care about this political issue. It's like, oh, I want if I ever have kids, them to have clean air to breathe, or I want them to, live in a world that's, actively anti-racist and actually addresses like the truly fraught history our country has. And all that is to say, I think a lot of my time in DC, as much as I would love to say like it was all like, oh, Mr. Smith goes to Washington, and yeah, I love the West Wing too. But I think a lot of what I learned was that there are people that genuinely want to work for them, but um, that genuinely want the government to work for people. Um, and those are the underdogs a lot of the time. And so I think especially, I would never say um, I think in the span of my life, I'm very grateful for the ways that I've even evolved politically as a person, since the 2016 election, and I think that is a watershed for a lot of people that went to college when I did, just because it's maybe made us face a lot of the ugly things that we thought we had faced before,
Mm.
um, in a very, like, real and if we don't address this now, we never will sort of way. I know it's a very conceptual answer, but I feel like people, when you talk about politics right now, I think you end up talking about values, exactly what you were saying, and I
I
don't think
hope.
that's anything to be ignored.
Yeah, I hope that's the case. It's funny because I don't think you know this, but I think I talked to your mom about this when we were hanging out back in the day. But I grew up in South Central Los Angeles. I grew up in Los Angeles between the warring factions of the Bloods and the Crips, and so what I saw was people not talk about higher education or family or public service. I saw an environment where unfortunately families were fractured and, it was a struggle to even get by. So when, and then, fortunate enough to sort of get out of there and, talk to people that were, educated and had wealth and were creative and your experience, I mean, it's such a contrast and people that I was able to have a little bit of empathy coming out of that, really thinking I never would. I never really actually thought when I was younger I would actually leave the neighborhood. So, I'm not even sure where I'm going with this, but there's a certain empathy that comes from having that firsthand knowledge of people that desperately struggle, you know, from people that actually read about it and hear about it, but don't have firsthand knowledge of it. And there's this big disconnect about why that is and who's to blame. And, it's such a can of
Yeah.
worms and we're not communicating well enough because there's a lack of understanding of how to fix that because we don't even believe it is what it is.
Yeah, and I think, one of my closest friends from college, still one of my closest friends to this day, um, she we, like, vehemently disagreed about a lot of things when I first met her. She, um, was raised in the in parts of the Midwest where exactly like what you were saying, like people struggle and people want the government to butt out of their lives because, like it only causes problems. And from that, like, of course, people have exactly what you were saying, like certain ideas about who's for and against them. Like that makes total sense. And especially like in the time I've known her, she's evolved a lot, not only as a person, but also in her political beliefs.
No.
And I think that like I think that evolution, like people always are like, oh, cancel culture, cancel. Like I don't
Yeah.
really I really think that, like, especially in interpersonal relationships, people right now are really, really, especially people my age, I think are trying to be like, but I have this personal experience and I really want to share it with you. And I think that's, exactly what you were saying about that's the disconnect I feel like in when people go from, oh, that experience to politics. Like, when you do think about the like who our elected representatives are, um, I'm really proud to be part of a generation where the young lawmakers are, mostly advocating for whether it's healthcare reform, paid leave, like all of these things that will help generations down the line and solve those structural problems that exactly like you were talking about, like the community of South Central LA is a structural problem that was created by all these policy decisions over years and years. And so I think the disconnect there comes back to whose interests are being represented in our government. Um, Especially when we think about you know, you were saying how much the world has changed since the 90s, like whether it be like the internet or whatever you want to like think about it. Most of our representatives grew up in a world true, and I'm very eager to be represented by people that will not only listen to young people and working people and all of the ways the world has changed. Like that also needs to be heard in government as much as it does in our personal lives. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. And what's frustrating is that, um, uh, I mean, you and I don't think we're really connected on Facebook, but like I have friends of mine that are very close to me that are on Facebook, and anytime anything outrageous to them happens or they see, they blast it all over Facebook. We, what's disappointing to me is that we seem to be lacking the ability to understand, agree on what facts are. So I can't even it's hard to have a conversation with somebody I disagree with when we can't even start the conversation with the sky is blue. If you and
Yeah.
I can't agree that the sky is blue, I don't I don't know where to go with that. So it requires, I think, a new art form and conversation, because what we did 20 years ago really does not seem to work.
Yeah, and I think in addition to that, like, you could talk about politics and what people believe, but if we're not also talking about, like, the media we consume,
Yeah.
like, that's a whole missing part of the puzzle that has also completely turned upside down in my lifetime, and honestly, in your lifetime too, and you
Yeah.
talk about, uh, the unfortunate demise of local news, like, all of these things that when you talk about facts that you think about, um, it's really unfortunate, like, there are all these, like, very skilled journalists and writers out of work because of the way that the media is driven, and, like, I don't think, I'm an undergrad who has only barely burst into the workforce, but I think dissociating that from what you were saying about, like, "Oh, the sky is blue," is something that a lot of people do that makes me frustrated because I'm like, oh, there's this whole other thing that now we sit on our phones and scroll every day and we pick what we scroll, and all the algorithms that we scroll on are showing us, the most outrageous, like most engaged, like all of the things that
Salacious.
drive what
Yeah.
we're consuming
Yeah.
every day is exactly what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's crazy. It's crazy. And, I tell my friends, when they were like, oh, I saw it here, I saw it there. And I'm like, I'll give you the list of news channels that I'll watch. And I will freely admit that news is a business. And no matter what side of the fence you're on, whether you support them or don't, all of them are in the business of making money. And so the
Yeah. And
information that they present is based on profits. It's not just purely a reflection of what's happening in the world.
yeah, and I'll say this too, like the longest stretch of cable news that I watched was like the day of inauguration celebrations. Like I do
Me
not on
too.
a daily basis watch cable news for, quite frankly, that exact reason.
Yeah.
Because it's not ex it's just, especially in someone who like, I enjoy podcasts and I enjoy reading much more than I enjoy like watching TV. But I think that's a big shift that's gonna get even more, I think it's gonna get even bigger, hopefully, or not hopefully, but like probably in the course of my lifetime, is that's just gonna keep changing. Like I don't think
I'm
Tess.
good. I'm good. I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
Sorry.
You're good. It's all good.
I love it. I
Tess
love
just
it.
fell over. I'm
Oh
sorry.
my God. She wants to be on camera. She could just ask. She doesn't.
Floor and my foot and carry on.
Are you okay? Okay.
Ignore me.
No.
Talk your shit.
But all I was trying to say is that like I don't think, I don't think I'm one to say it's like it's a good or a bad thing, but I think it's changing society, sorry, in just like an earthquake level way.
Yeah. Agreed.
And especially the local news piece is one that like people don't think about a lot, but like, especially in LA, we're lucky enough to have, a fantastic local
Yeah.
newspaper. But that's something that a lot of, especially smaller town places, like are just thoroughly.
I see you. You all right?
Yeah, I was worried about that.
We can stop. We can pause it if you want.
No, she's fine. She's fine.
Okay, good. She's limping away.
Yeah.
So, it's funny because this is a kind of conversation that we could probably talk for an hour all week.
Yeah.
What is, I wanted to get your take because that world, like when you worked in DC, that's like I don't know what that's like. Like I worked in entertainment. I can tell you all about that. But, what's that like for you? Because like you were probably attracted to that environment. What was it like when you finally got into the weeds of it?
Yeah, and first I would say is like I would love to be like, oh, I'm in the weeds of it, but very much so, as a young political person, there that like that you can think you're in the weeds of it, and there's always more. There's always
Sure.
something deeper.
Sure.
But I actually think someone that I worked with once told me that LA and DC actually aren't all that different. Like they're both industry
Oh,
towns.
wow.
They're both like really driven by industries with major gatekeepers and like it's really hard to break in. But I think especially as I was really grateful to go to school there because everything, it was really cool for me to learn about things and then also see them like happening. um but I think it's also, there are a lot of people that do get into politics for less, I think, righteous, I can think is the only
Well,
word
if
I
they were
can think of.
career driven, for example, if they could see a career in politics, you wouldn't sit down and think, what do my constituents need? You would think about what's a 30-year path to success? Like what platforms work? I could imagine having that that personal conversation.
Yeah, and I think especially, and I'm really grateful in that the offices that I was able, the official offices I was able to work for, were mostly staffed with women at the helm.
Nice.
Um, and like not so like there was parity in leadership, but I am very grateful to have had female mentors from those experiences.
Nice.
Um, and I think that's meant a lot for me because I think politics, it's not cutthroat, but it's demanding in a way that is very, think on your feet sort of situation. And I think that can be really scary for a lot of people that are unsure of themselves. I'm a very indecisive person. And I think early on, just as in we call them hill turns, like interns on Capitol Hill, being trusted with that sort of thing, it gives you confidence. And I'm really grateful I got to have that experience. I recognize that's an incredibly privileged experience, but I think it also, did maybe realize, Capitol Hill is also a lot of there are a lot of very, very powerful and very official people. There are also a bunch of 20 somethings running around over caffeinated just trying to figure out how to like get I don't know, like get this bill over to like the other side or something like that. And I think that sort of chaos that's like, oh, all these people like really aren't like all not all that, but like everything and like high on the pedestal as I thought that they were.
Yeah.
Like that really I was like, oh, this is very,
Humanizing almost.
yeah, and I think even, the first time I really spent time on Capitol Hill was after my freshman year. The first big legislative fight of the Trump era was the Obamacare repeal, which by all means, we were not the betting horse to like win that fight and save it. But one of my friends at the time, she is from Georgia, and which now is very exciting that we have two Democratic senators. But me and my team of young women at the place I was working at the time, a women's advocacy organization, were like, we want people our age, we want to help them go to their Senate offices and talk to the people that are there for that exact reason. Like it's not like it's this big scary thing, but it's because people think that it is, that's it's kind of people self-selecting in or
Oh,
out of it.
wow. Wow.
So it's like the people that get their voices heard are the people that think their voices should be heard. And so one of my favorite days is a friend of mine went to Capitol Hill and spoke to a very dismissive, for lack of a better word, staffer that didn't agree with us. But we were like, no, we're your constituents and you're going to hear us out. And I think that's something that I'll always carry with me, of just like, these things are very doable. And then, I remember so clearly being like in my tiny dorm room in the dark at 3 a.m. watching C-SPAN and seeing John McCain vote no on repeal and just being like, it worked.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, there were so many fights to get there
Yeah.
again and again and again. But like that, being a little cog in that machine is a feeling like no other. And I can only hope that most political people are driven by, that sort of feeling like, wow, we really did something.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's really inspiring. I think that, you guys, your age group and younger, what's hard for my generation to sort of absorb sometimes is that you guys are actually writing the script currently. You're writing what it will be. And so my hope is that you in particular, and your age group really embrace the fact that you really do have the power, because it is a place and process that is of the people. And it's easy to look
Yeah.
back and imagine that it's a handful of gatekeepers, as you said, but really it belongs to us. Not that
Yeah.
we're going to
And I
storm
think
it or
that's,
anything or, destroy it, but it does
well,
belong to us.
No, I think, and especially for people that have ever been anywhere near Capitol Hill, like that's why what happened on January 6th was so like harrowing, just because, you know, we live in a country where you can, you know, as long as you go through some metal detectors, go and walk into the office of the elected official that represents you. Like that's something you can do. And I think especially like I know a lot of people saying like, oh, I'm not surprised that that happened, like especially even when I as like an intern went through security on the day to day, like there were days when I was like stopped and they were like, what's in your bag? So I just like, especially watching that, I was just like, how and so I think it's really um really haunting for a lot of people that have ever, you know, worked there or been anywhere near there, to have that sort of like thing happen, especially, you know, like so I lived a few blocks from the White House because I was lucky enough to go to GW. And I remember when I went on a tour of GW when I first like visited the campus, they were like, "Oh, we live in 14 security zones because we have like the White House and like this federal building and this federal building." And so um, I think that that's what's really harrowing, and I think a lot of people from my generation are not surprised because it's all of those same ugly undertones that like people have been painting so many brushes over for so long, and like you can't ignore those people. And I think
Agreed.
I think, well, you can ignore them, but I think a lot of people when they're like unifying against that sort of disgusting racism, anti-Semitism, bigotry, like whatever you want to call it, is so important. And I don't think it's a hard issue to decide where you land on. And I think
Agreed.
it's really gross that some people are treating that like it's a very like hard thing to like sidestep one way or the other, because it's not.
It's not. It's not a gray area.
Yeah. And one of my favorite quotes actually, I think, is from Elie Wiesel, which I can't remember what it is, but it's basically like when you're like choosing to be neutral always helps, like never helps the victim, always helps the oppressor. And choosing to be silent doesn't help anyone. Something
Yeah.
along those lines, but
Yeah.
like especially, you know, when things are as clear cut as they are, I'm just, you know, I don't have words for those people.
Yeah, it's true. It is very, very ugly. And my hope is that, you know, we could hit this, address this eyes wide open. I am the eternal optimist, and as ugly as that was, I think in the long term it will have good fruit that comes from that, because I think people didn't really truly believe that it could get that bad and potentially worse. And so we are now in an environment
Yeah.
where you have to really decide what your tolerance is.
Yeah, and I think it's important to be an optimist. I think like a lot of people see political people as deeply cynical people. I'm like, how can you possibly can you stay in politics for so long if you're not optimistic
Yeah.
that things will change? Like
Yeah.
that sounds exhausting.
Yeah, it's true. I agree. And on that note, let me ask you this. What were some of the more inspiring things you saw firsthand or experienced when you were there?
Yeah, I think, oh my God, the summer of the healthcare, that fight to save the Affordable Care Act, um like seeing people seriously with whose lives are on the line just say, you know, of course you can arrest me, like this is what I'm fighting for. I found that very inspiring, but also, you know, like if they can do it, why can't I, sort of
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of other things that I mean, seeing AOC get elected to Congress, I
Yeah.
don't think that will ever be underestimated with how powerful her and Ayanna Pressley and Ilhan Omar, um, their election to Congress was. Um, just because, especially like, I think it sounds weird, but like seeing millennials in Congress is very different than thinking like that's a very different generation than,
Yeah.
having someone who's a baby boomer represent
Yeah. Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and so it's this like things like that just like are very like breath of fresh air sort of thing.
I agree.
Elizabeth Warren's presidential run really
Yeah.
inspired me.
Yeah.
I think especially when I was in DC, just seeing someone so blatant about not only how much she knew, but like how she uses all of her knowledge and like, to apply to be, like this is how we can make government work for most people. Because I think um there was one day I was lucky enough to intern for a ethics in government firm, which I learned so much. There is all these, FEC filings, all those nerdy databases. They're so important. And, FOIA requests, all that stupid, annoying stuff. We got to go to a hearing for the emoluments clause, which still the government, the president shouldn't be profiting from personal comfort like company or while he's in office.
Duh.
Still in the court system, by the way. But I saw then Congresswoman Katie Hill, and who else was on that committee? I think Katie Porter was on that committee as well. And just, seeing them all in person. I was the last person that got a seat in the committee room because you have to like line up outside.
Oh, wow.
But it was like just seeing that in person. And I remember it being that was about emoluments and the Hatch Act. And just being like all these people here for like for a hearing on the Hatch Act, and I think that's a testament to, the people in Congress that are really willing to exactly what I was saying, like make like their time on the committee, like asking questions that might be really complex, but making in the way that anyone that turns on C-SPAN can understand them. Like,
Right.
I don't think there's anything to scoff at about that because that just means more people are getting informed in like
Yeah.
a really exciting way.
That's
I'm
cool. That's
trying to
cool.
think. There was just so much that happened in the 4 years I was there, and especially, there was a protest every other weekend, but just I think definitely people's willingness to, like, continuously, um, like, not only just, like, keep fighting for different things, it really tested a lot of people. It tested my resolve, in a lot of ways, and I think, even in my 4 years there, changed a lot of what I thought about politics, whether that be in terms of, uh, I don't know. I think it's just I think when people go to college and, like, have that, time to, like, simmer on like, on their
Yeah.
own brains, I
Yeah.
think it changes anyone, and I think it
Sure.
just made me think more critically about, about the world I wanted to live in a way I didn't before. That's
Yeah.
all. Yeah.
Well, I think it is designed to change you. I think that's kind of the point. I think you come in one side and then you begin a process of learning and understanding. That's pretty cool. So what's next for you? Like at some point we're going to be able to like walk about the cabin and pretend like we have a normal life. Where like what's sort of your fantasy direction?
I have no idea.
I love it.
I often joke with my mom that for someone that knows that for someone that really likes having a plan and knowing what's come next, like I chose the most tumultuous industry, and like to try to find a job, much less a place in. So I think there are a lot of really cool things happening in terms of campaigns, in terms of organizing right now. I would love to say like definitively I know what I want to do. I don't,
Fair answer.
but especially after being in Michigan, but on the campaign, like being on a campaign is a very specific energy and exhaustion, and I would be remiss to say I'll never do another campaign again. I absolutely will.
Yeah.
But I just think it's a matter of when, and finding another righteous fight that'll
Yeah.
make
Yeah.
me want to do the long nights and the barely any sleep and all of that fun stuff.
That's cool. That's cool. Very nice. That's really cool. I mean, I really appreciate you coming on, because this is like, beyond what I see in the paper, in the media. I don't really know, it's cool to talk to you, be somebody who's actually there, because I love those little nuances that you talked about. That's really exciting. So, and then if anybody's gonna kind of want to see your thoughts anywhere on social, where are you at?
Yeah, the only place I really post my thoughts, so to speak, is on Twitter, which is at Hannah KW. But other than that, I've been trying to stay off Twitter,
Yeah.
but I'm sure I'll get angry about something soon.
Well, let me ask you this then, because you mentioned earlier that you're a huge podcast fan. What are some of your top podcasts that you like?
Oh my gosh. Well, of all time, I loved The Dream, which is a podcast about pyramid schemes and how
Mhm.
like they basically persist
Oh,
um
sure.
legally, which has it has some serious ties with the DeVos family. Another reason I wanted to work in Michigan. But I'm trying to think of another more day-to-day podcast. Oh, Wind of Change is another great podcast about um it's basically about it's by one of my favorite writers and journalists, Patrick Radden Keefe, and he heard a tip that the song Wind of Change was written by the CIA as like a way to bring about the end of the Cold War, which like they have no idea whether it's true, but they speculate it, and it's so fun. So if anyone is a history nerd, highly recommend. It's so fun, and
That's cool.
also like there are interviews with Skid Row and Motley Crue like sprinkled throughout it. So
Wow. That's crazy. That's crazy. I'll have to check that out. I really
can I give
appreciate it.
one last one because it's
Yeah,
my
of course.
favorite?
Is it
Okay.
about the Fillmore girls?
So there's an episode. Oh no, 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 no.
Okay.
And it's the Gilmore Girls again, television royalty. But there's a podcast called The Other Latif, and it's about a man that still is held at Guantanamo Bay, and about his story. And I'm very interested in like ethics in the legal system, and it's a truly wild story about this man, and I genuinely still something I don't know what I believe about, but something that just really made me think, and I
Oh,
loved
neat.
it, and it was
That's
really
cool.
good.
That's cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Hannah. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you
Um,
for inviting
yeah.
me.